Hi, boosters, and welcome to the Boosted Volunteer Webinar Series. I'm Robin Eissler. I'm the CEO and founder of Booster Hub, the software application built exclusively for booster clubs. Today, we're going to tackle a big topic, strategic planning for booster clubs. This is so important because often as a booster club leader, you are so heads down into the day to day that you never get a chance to take a step back and think strategically about your booster club. And really, your role is both. You need to manage your booster club for today and also for tomorrow. So today we're going to dive into some things that you can do to prepare your booster club for the future. Let's get started. So I invite you to join us on our live webinar series. We post the live webinar dates and times on our social media and also on our website. And during those live webinars, you can collaborate with other boosters. You can ask questions in the chat. And we usually have a special offer at the end of our live webinars. Today, we do have a strategic planning guide for you that you can email us and get if you stick around till the end of this webinar. So let's dive in. Why does strategic planning count? How it helps you get your booster club prepared for the future. We're going to talk a little bit about mission and vision because those things are so important when you're looking out to the future to know exactly who you serve, how you want to serve them, and what you want it to look 5 years from now. We're going to talk about the volunteer challenge. This is the biggest obstacle facing almost every booster club is they just don't have enough people to get the work done. And so we're going to talk about some ways to solve that. We're going to dive in a little bit to budgets, financial systems, and fraud prevention. We're going to talk about why it's really important to have a system of record for your booster club. We'll touch a little bit on engagement, marketing, and communications today, and then give you a plan of action for how to get started and some tips and tricks on getting your strategic plan set up for your booster club. We hear so often at Booster Hub from boosters that say, we don't have a plan. We just write checks when the coach asks. We never have enough volunteers. We never raise enough money. And these are all symptoms. They're symptoms of a culture that's not aligned properly. They're symptoms of not enough communication. And they're symptoms of a mission and a vision that haven't been communicated properly. And so it's hard when we hear from boosters because we want to tell them those things, but they're head down in today. And we need to tell them, hey, actually, this problem started about a year or two ago. And this is why you're seeing these symptoms today. So while I wish I could give you the magic solution to get more volunteers for this Friday night, you're really going to be working on volunteers for next year's Friday nights. So this is why strategic planning counts, why it's so important. It's going to help you build a framework for long-term success for your booster club for today, tomorrow, and beyond. Clubs that plan strategically raise about 40 to 60% more funds because they have a budget. They know what they're raising money for. They have a communication plan, and they get people engaged. So it's not rocket science. It's just good planning and operations. Strategic planning helps prevent crisis and thus crisis management, which I think a lot of us spend our days in. It helps alleviate volunteer burnout, and it builds credibility within your community. When your community knows that the Booster Club is a solid framework that's going to be around for a long time, it makes it easier to get sponsorships. It also makes it easier to get volunteers. It also ensures that your program goals are met and your students are supported. Oftentimes in the Booster Club, we can get focused on a pancake breakfast or a craft show or something like that. And sometimes we lose sight of the really big picture, which is making sure that our students succeed. So let's dive into the mission. Who are you today? This is where you define your purpose, who you serve, and what you do today. This is usually something as simple as we support the students in the Central High School band. We help them go on trips. We help pay for uniforms, and we provide food for all students at the events. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. The mission helps you align your program director goals with your booster club goals. It's really important to make sure that your program director goals and your booster club goals are the same. Sometimes in the boosters, we can get excited about certain things, and then our coach or our band director says, hey, we're not even doing that this year. So it's important to make sure that you communicate with your program director and make sure that your booster club is aligned with your director's plans. The mission also guides daily decision making and budgeting. So, for example, if somebody wants to do something, add a scholarship or add perhaps a trip for the Booster Club officers. If you have your mission defined and you've got all of your goals set, you can very easily make that decision. And if you've got a budget, you know ahead of time, hey, that's in our budget or it's not. Also, when you're setting the mission, you want to make sure that you're aligned with school district and association policies. So, if you're in a state association or a national association that have rules on fundraising or how your boosters can support or even scholarships, you want to make sure you're following those guidelines. So, one of the things I hear often is that we've never had more than 50% of our families pay their fees. This is a culture problem. So, this is where your mission and your vision really can come into play, because you can say things like, today we only have 50% of our families that pay fees. We'd like to get that to 80% or ideally 100%. And by offering some scholarships for the students who can't afford to pay their fees, we can get to 100% with our organization. So these are some of the things that you'll see as symptoms of bad planning in your organization. And this is where you want to set the mission and vision to make sure that you can say, hey, we want to be an organization where our whole community gets involved. So your vision is, what do you want to be? Describe it as, what you're working to create. It should be inspiring. I like to talk about having every student supported. That's where scholarships come into play. Or we want to build a 100% culture. I mean, can we really get every single one of our families to participate in volunteer hours? If we just had everyone do one slot, that would change the dynamics of our organization substantially. You can get there if you build a plan to get there, and it starts with your mission and vision. So I think missions are a little easier because they're a little more tactical. But here's two samples of visions. So first, for an athletic program, we're creating championship caliber athletic programs where excellence, character, and sportsmanship unite our community, with every family actively engaged and every athlete has the resources to compete at the highest level. On the fine arts side, it might be something like, we're building the premier music program in our region where financial barriers never silence talent. Every student musician experiences the transformative power of performance and excellence, and our entire community rallies together in support. You can always make these a little more fun. AI is a great tool for writing things like mission and vision, but you really want to just spell it out. This is what we're trying to do. It's documented. If anyone comes into your booster club and says, hey, how come we give scholarships for fees? You can point back to your mission and your vision. Let's dive into the hard part, the volunteer challenge. On average, a volunteer board member serves about 2 to 3 years. Burnout is very common. It's common. I've accented it there for you. Most clubs scramble to fill positions in weeks before the elections. So you've got your board elections coming up, and it's the last minute, and you're just trying to find people to fill the slots. Institutional knowledge disappears every time someone leaves. So you've had a really great person on the booster board, they leave. Now half of what happens in the operations of the booster club is gone. The most dangerous thing to a booster club for longevity is what I call Debbie do everything. The one person who's been on the booster board forever and who does everything. That's a recipe for disaster, because you're not spreading the work over a community, and all the institutional knowledge gets in one place. And so you really want to try to avoid to have that scenario in your booster club. And don't get me wrong, these people are awesome. They do great work. They carry the booster club on their backs for long periods, but that's really not the way it should be. And it impacts the potential of the organization. And I also put the 90-10 rule. Typically it's the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. In booster clubs, I think it's more like 10-90, 10% do 90% of the work. And that's really what you're trying to shift. If you could just shift that to 30-70, think of the relief of on your shoulders of being the volunteer to go, oh my gosh, there's so many more people now to help with the pit crew or to help with setting up for the banquet. This is so much easier. And that's really hard because you have to delegate, you have to set up roles and responsibilities to make these things successful. And a lot of us tend not to do that. We'd just rather do it ourselves. I'm that person. I'd rather just do it myself to get it done. But I find that organizations that I participate in are always more successful when I delegate the work. And without planning, volunteer recruitment is always a crisis. You're always in crisis mode. You're always sending that dang email that says, we need volunteers tonight. And the problem is you run out of currency with your community. You can only send that email so many times before it just gets muted and no one listens to it and no one responds to it. So you've got to get ahead of that and make sure that you're getting your volunteer planning, excuse me, done earlier. So I like to think of volunteer involvement as progressive involvement. So you start with the person volunteering for one shift, a concession stand shift or something like that. And then as you get to know the person, you may ask them to chair a committee. Typically during 8th grade, freshman, sophomore year, it's great to get these people involved at the next higher level where they're taking some responsibility and accountability in the booster club. And then from there, I like to mentor those people to then join the booster board and work their way up in the program. So you never want to really bring somebody right from the outside and make them a board member. That's not great for institutional knowledge or how the booster club operates. It's also really not great for building your pipeline, for getting those volunteers working their way up. So some of the things that you can do is you want to identify early, spot potential leaders 12 to 24 months before you need them. So if you've got a superstar down at the middle school doing great things, have lunch with them. Say, hey, we know that your student is coming into the high school next year, and we'd really like to talk to you about getting involved in the booster club. And maybe even in their first year, they could chair a committee. You want to use mentorship and pair a new volunteer with an experienced leader so that they can start to share that knowledge. They can show them how things work. And also, they have a connection, so they're interested in participating more. You want to be very transparent and document all the rules with job descriptions and time commitments. And you want to use your nominating committee. A lot of times I see nominating committees sit dormant, and they should really be working all year. Your nominating committee, it should be their job to be walking around the room and introducing themselves to people and finding people who may be interested in participating. And then you want to publicly and frequently recognize your volunteers. Let's jump into booster officer traits because I think this is important. So if you're looking for someone who could be the president of the booster club or lead the booster club, there's a certain set of traits that I think I see often and help make that person super effective in that role. So the first thing is small business owners are great people to run a booster club. First of all, they bring a variety of skills and can allocate the time, which is important. But more importantly, a booster club is a small business. And so if you've got those people who are experienced in doing all these tasks without a huge team, they're usually really good at running your booster club. And so you want to kind of keep your eye on those people. Not to say that other people can't do a great job, they can, but this is just one trait that I think will help you find some strong leaders for your booster club. If people are active in other nonprofit organizations, they understand the dynamics, they know how to work as a team. That's a really good sign. If they have a strong social media presence, then they can easily amplify your mission and already tell compelling stories. They have a big following. So that's like, getting a lot of bang for your buck because they're going to amplify the engagement messages, the fundraising messages, the volunteer messaging because they've already got that audience. If you've seen someone who's had consistent attendance and follow through, even in just attending your booster club meetings, that parent may not be one to raise their hand and volunteer, but if they're showing up for every meeting, they probably have some interest. And so, pull them aside and ask them, hey, would you be interested in leading this committee or joining us on the board? And look for people who get the job done. So there are people who get it done, and then there are people who you give the job and they create more work. than actually doing the job. And you want to avoid those people. And sometimes you can't tell the difference until you let them fly and then it doesn't work out well. So there are some people who just aren't suited for the role, and that's okay. You just need to be able to identify it. And you want to look for natural relationship builders, people who have an active network and can bring new families in. There's always that one mom or dad who's always down talking to everybody and knows everybody because they've had 5 kids in the school, and they can easily, extend your network and your audience and your community. So look for those people. One note that I didn't put here is you always want to talk to your program director or your coach about your leadership pipeline. It's important to make sure that the students are going to be participating in the program in 3 to 5 years, and sometimes the parents and the student might be on different pages. So that's something to consider. I would always sit down with our coach and have lunch, and we would go through who we're looking at for 2 years from now and 3 years from now, and it gave me a good indication of these are the people that I need to focus on coming into our booster club. I can't say this enough, but build a 100% culture. And you're like, what is that? Why does she keep saying that? When you set a goal of 100% participation in your booster club, and then you communicate it often, then people get excited to help you achieve that goal. So you're not going to set this for everything. You're not going to get 100% of people to participate in everything. But in my old booster club, we did it for 2 things. We did it for our volunteer slots. We ran a concession stand. And so we asked everyone to do 1 shift in the concession stand. And then the other thing we asked is that everybody donate either a case of water or I think it was $40 to our concession fund. And so, if you wanted to go shopping and you could get a case of water discounted, you could do that. Or if you just wanted to pay the concession donation, you could do that as well. And on both those programs, 2 of my years in the booster club, we were able to get 100% participation, but we also talked about it a lot. We presented it a lot. At our first parent meeting, we had the sign up for concessions. I'd hold up the app and say, okay, everybody, we want everyone to work 1 concession shift. If we do that, it's much easier on the whole program. We get everything accomplished. And usually we would fill about 85 to 90% of our concession slots in that first hour at that parent meeting. And then that just gave us 10% to fill, and we could work through that on our own. And we often did get everyone to at least work 1 shift. And same with the concession fee. Again, if people know that's the goal of the program, they're excited, they want to help the program achieve the goals, then everybody gets on board and helps get that accomplished. The other thing that I've learned is a lot of times what I'll do is take the list. So I've got 100 people, and let's say 84 have donated or 84 have signed up. Then the 16 that are remaining, they're going to get about 3 times as much messaging about that 100% than those other 86. And so that's really effective. So you're not slamming your same audience like, I've already volunteered, what are you talking about? So you take your non-volunteers, your non-donors, and say, hey, we've got 86% have donated, or 86% have signed up, 14% haven't. And then those people know, oh, they're talking about me. Maybe I should get this done. So you can do it politely. You can do it with excitement, and it'll really help grow your booster club, because as people pick up just 1 concession shift, they start to understand the boosters a little more. They start to realize the amount of work, and that tends to get them more interested in potentially participating in the future. Let's jump into strategic budgeting. So I recommend you should always have a budget for your booster club. But when you're doing a strategic plan, you're going to look at a multi-year budget. I think of this as like the financial roadmap of your organization. It's really your strategic plan in dollars. And this helps you plan for things like major capital investments. So if you're a band, your trailer wrap or your instruments or your uniforms, of your sports program at, maybe volleyball nets or football equipment, or perhaps every other year your students go on a trip. And if you plan out your budgets over multiple years, then you can spread some of those bigger capital costs over multiple years. And then you're not always having to raise funds for a big capital expense. So you really want to think of your multi-year budget as, what does it take over 5 years or 10 years to run this program? And how much money do we need to raise on an annual basis to meet those goals? Without having budgets, you get into impulsive spending. Like, hey, we've got an extra 10 grand, let's spend that on something. And a lot of people go, oh, let's spend all the money in the bank. And when you have a multi-year budget, you say, oh, we can't, because we have to buy uniforms in 3 years, and that money is allocated to those uniforms. Effective budgets help align resources with the mission, and transparency builds trust with your community. So if you get these budgets built and then you share them with your members, then they understand, why are they always talking about we have to raise money, we have to do this? When they see the big picture, they start to understand things more. And note that a strategic budget over, planning out 5 years from now is probably going to look different than your previous year's spending. Because if you haven't done a budget strategically and over multi-years, then you're going to see some impulse spending on your historical budgets. So just something to think about. So when you're building a budget, you want to gather input and analyze your previous budgets. And if you don't have one, you want to look at your spending. You want to draft your strategic budget and make sure you align it with your mission. You build in contingencies, you account for that long-term spending, and then also invest your reserves. So if you're building reserves, and you should be, it doesn't take too many years before it's a sizable amount of money in the bank. If you have more than $5,000 in the bank at any time, you should be looking for ways to earn interest or invest that money in a safe investment fund. So there's a lot of options out there, but don't let money just sit in the bank, particularly if you're seasonal and the money's sitting there for 6 months. Make sure that the money is working. You want to review and refine your budget, present it at your board meeting, and adjust it with feedback from people, and then approve and communicate it and share that budget with the community. So again, you always want to make sure that your budget aligns with your director's goals for the program and the school district requirements. So you're going to take into account all of those things when you do this. I didn't dive too much into building a budget in this webinar, but on our YouTube channel, there is another webinar specifically focused on budgeting with a lot more detail about income and expenses and how to set it up. So if you really want a lot of budgeting detail, jump over to that budget webinar. You want to think about financial systems and fraud prevention. So I was preparing for this webinar and actually a podcast tomorrow on fraud prevention in booster clubs. And I always go into Google once every 3 or 4 months when I'm talking about fraud on some of our social media channels. And I just look up, when was the last fraud event that's in the news for a booster club? Every time I do that, it's usually within the past 2 to 3 weeks. Yesterday, it was yesterday. So there was a booster club that had lost everything. The treasurer had taken all the money. And now these kids had this program with no money, and the new boosters were embarrassed, and the community loses trust in the program. No one wants to donate anymore. So it's really important to set up some systems that track everything so that you've got checks and balances in your organization. And you're like, oh, we have QuickBooks, it's all in there. Well, the problem with that is your treasurer has the login. Maybe one other person has the login. No one else is seeing those records. No one's probably seen a reconcile. Maybe you're seeing some financial statements, but you have no idea if those are balanced with the bank or not. And you have no idea if those financials match what you actually sold in your your online systems or your concession stand. So you want to adopt a system where you're able to see everything, that multiple people can have read-only access. It's really important. And that gives you really good checks and balances on your financials. For fraud prevention, you need a digital paper trail. Document every expense, every outgoing transfer, what's it for, who requested it, where does it fall in the budget. You should have regular audits once a year. You should have separation of duties. So perhaps someone who does the actual bookkeeping and someone who presents the financial records, and then maybe even a third-party observer, and very transparent reporting. So anyone should be able to go in and see the status of the financials and when they've been reconciled. And if I had to say one thing about fraud prevention, Reconciliation is the most important thing, to make sure that what's happening in the credit card processing is actually happening in the bank, and that the outgoing money is matches all the approved inbound request. That's really going to get you ahead of fraud prevention and stop using cash. Those are the two things that will get you 90% of the way there on fraud prevention. You want to look for ways to reduce the treasurer workload. This is really important. Treasurers and booster clubs are so overworked, and people don't think about it. They just, oh, this is the way we do it. Treasurer does it. And there's some poor volunteer who's spending 10, 20 hours a week at night doing this checkbox and match over here because that's the way they've always done it. And that leads to volunteer burnout. So evaluate your processes, consider switching to electronic payments, debit cards even, because those things help alleviate paperwork and runs to the bank, make it easier to reconcile. So you want to think about all those things with the workload on your treasurer. And you always want to do an annual review of your processes and make sure that they're smart and you're doing things that make sense. So this takes us right into the system of record. And so here's the problem. When you have 3 or 4 or 5 different systems, you're using a Square account over here, you've got a QuickBooks account over here, you're keeping track of checks and cash on another sheet. There's really not a way to know that all those things are matching up. And if you want to reconcile all those things, you're going to have to do a lot of work. And so all these scatter systems start to create holes. You lose passwords, institutional knowledge when people leave. I just saw on a forum today that a treasurer left and changed the password on all the financial logins. And now no one from the Booster Club can get into anything. That's not good. And you don't want to set yourself up for that. It increases fraud risk from lack of visibility. And then again, you've got that volunteer burnout because people are trying to go over here and find things and over here and find things. So simplify and make it easier. Now, we happen to have Booster Hub, a system of record. There are other tools out there, I will say. This isn't just a Booster Hub commercial, but consider consolidating into one system to track everything. Your fundraising, your donations, your communication, your volunteer coordination and scheduling, event planning, merchandise, and membership management. When you bring it all together, something beautiful happens. It makes the workload on the current volunteers much easier. It also gives clarity to your membership. So if I have one place to go for all the Booster Club information, it makes it much easier to find out how to volunteer or how to pay my fees. Whereas if I'm spread over, there's a link in this email to volunteer, and you go over to this system and you have to log in to make your payment. And then there's a website where you do this. People get confused, and it makes it harder to get those community members engaged and participating in your Booster Club. So if you've got a great system of record, the things you're going to start to see is time savings, reduced volunteer workload, better results, and higher engagement. You'll have great transparency on the financials, reduction of fraud, and it's easier to transition the positions. So when a new board comes in, they can easily jump in, see what's happening, and transfer the information to the new board. So really think about getting a solid system of record set up for your Booster Club. We're going to just briefly touch on engagement. We did do a really deep dive into engagement and marketing on a previous webinar. You can find it on our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great tactical engagement strategies in that webinar. But the real goal of engagement is to get strategic community engagement. So when you're doing your strategic plan, you're thinking about, how do I get the retirement community involved in our program? How do I get the local businesses involved in our program? How do I rally volunteers, raise funds, and get people to do things? And you want to think about that over several years, not just how do I get them there this Friday night. You want to look at multi-channel approach. So you should be on a lot of social medias. In our engagement webinar, we deep dive into social media tactics. Reels and video are really the strongest thing you can do right now. And you've got students, so put them to work helping you with your social media. Consistency for your marketing and engagement is really important. Ongoing promotion, ongoing telling of of your story and telling the story of your students. A big marketing calendar that plans it over a year or 2 years. So, when it's the slow season in January, start planning what posts you're going to do in June for your fees, or your volunteers, or your spirit week, all those things. And then think about measuring what works. When we did this plan and we did 4 posts on this fundraiser, we got these results. So then next year, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can just do the same thing. So from the strategic planning side, when you're looking at marketing and engagement, you want to think about the bigger picture and how do I make our program a community, keystone? How do I get people out to see our marching band besides just the families that are here? Because that helps give you a big base to pull from rather than just pulling from the same families over and over again. So when you're ready to set your strategic plan in action, your first step is to establish or refine your mission and vision, and that should take you 1 to 2 months, maybe 1 or 2 board meetings. You want to do an assessment of where you are now. What are we doing on all these things? Budgeting, engagement, systems of record, fraud prevention, financials. Set 3 to 5 strategic priorities for the next 1 to 3 years, and you can do that in probably the 3rd board meeting. And then develop an engagement plan to meet those goals, and then monitor it, review it, and start over again. So this is an ongoing process, but take it one bite at a time. So any little thing you do today is going to help you next year on Friday night to get more volunteers to that concession stand. Here's just a sample plan of action. So the Lincoln High Booster Club transformation, they had declining participation and financial instability. So they did some strategic planning with 3 priorities. The first was their volunteer pipeline. They really wanted to work on developing those volunteers over a period of time. They wanted to diversify their revenue. This is a great one, to bring in more money from sponsorships. And they wanted to have more consistent communication. So they put those in their strategic plan. Their volunteer base doubled, their fundraising increased 45%, and their community engagement tripled. So this is what your plan of action should look like. Hey, here's kind of our 3 problem areas. Here's 3 areas we could do better. And you may be doing pretty good already. So what are the areas you could improve? Even if it's just a 10 or 20% improvement, that makes a big difference over 2 or 3 years. Here's some just quick tips and tricks. Recruit volunteers in your middle school program. Also think about having some of your alumni and your alumni parents do volunteer slots. It's a great way to help you fill those. And again, if you build that into your strategic planning, hey, we're going to always do the 3rd Friday in September is going to be alumni volunteer night, and you start building that, 6 months in advance, you'll have some success with that. Use your nominating committee. It's oftentimes just an overlooked part of the Booster Club board. Really important. Make sure that they're out there meeting and greeting people at all your events, and keeping an eye out for those people who might have those traits to make good Booster Club leaders. Create a 100% culture, promote it, celebrate it. That's one of my favorite things. Publish your strategic plan and your strategic budget. Clear goals will help get your engagement up, help get people excited about your program. Be sure to simplify your processes, and then make changes, small changes, one bite at a time. Like sometimes when you talk about strategic planning, it can be an elephant and it can feel overwhelming. But if you just take one small step at a time, you can do a lot more in a year than you think you can, and you can do a lot less in a day, right? So we don't get as much done in the short term as we'd like, but in the long term, we usually get more done than we think we can. So focus on that, and that'll help you inch that strategic plan forward, help reducing some of those symptoms that you may see now, and get your Booster Club prepared for the future to support your students for the long run. So what we like to see is we have a 2 to 4 year plan with a clear budget and volunteer recruiting strategy. If you've got your budgeting right and your volunteer recruiting strategy right, your engagement, your fundraising, your volunteering, your fan base, it's going to be okay. These are the big ones to get tackled. And once you have them tackled, your Booster Club is going to be successful. We do have a full Booster Club strategic planning guide that we can send you. Just shoot us an email at team@boosterhub.com and just put strategic plan request as the subject line, and we'll get that over to you so you can review it and share it with your Booster Club board. We also invite you to join our boosted volunteer communities on Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as follow us on all the social medias. We do provide a lot of content to help boosters. We know that there aren't a lot of great resources out there for you, and so we like to provide those here at Booster Hub. And if you hadn't had a chance, check us out at boosterhub.com. We're a great system of record. We make it much easier to run your booster club, and we'll help you knock it out of the park. Have a great evening, and thank you for all the work that you do with your programs and supporting your students. We appreciate you.